Do you know people who are skeptical and judgmental, who sometimes even seem to have a negative attitude or show depressive traits? Do you want to learn how to deal better with this kind of people? Or do you sometimes wish you had a more critical mind yourself? The psychological key to understanding these character traits can reveal itself in the Judge archetype, in the tradition of Jungian psychology. We give you this key and tell you also how to recognize the personality archetype of the Judge and its unbalanced manifestation, the depressive disorder, also called dysthymia, and give you some tips on how to deal with this type of person in an optimal way. At the end of this video, we also tell you how an unbalanced Judge or someone suffering from a depression can bring their personality back into balance. The Archetypal Judge and the Depressive Disorder in 10 points. How to recognize and understand negative and depressive people. As explained in the intro video of this series, it is important for a healthy psychology to focus not only on the pathological manifestation of a personality trait, but also on its positive qualities. Therefore, we will take a closer look on both the depressive personality disorder and its positive counterpart, the archetype of the Judge. All the characteristics of an archetype can be derived from its personality traits, or the so-called meta-programs, which in turn can be derived from reposition and correspondence in the meta-model of the psyche according to Stefan Fiebig. The special feature and strength of this archetype model is that it represents the basic structure with which the 14 personality archetypes are simply and unambiguously defined and classified with their personality traits. It is a natural and logical structure that can be used for numerous applications, such as, for example, a model for effective communication, for hypnosis, coaching, or psychotherapy, and it can also reveal useful cross-connections between them. As an example, we will show you right away the links between personality archetypes, the hero's journey, and the structure of any successful undertaking. Point 1. What makes the archetype of the Judge tick? The archetypal Judge, also called scientist, belongs to the melancholic temperament. He is primarily interested in information and less in ideals, people or activities. His main focus is on doubts and on the reduction of information to that which is safe, right and true. His basic needs are justice as well as congruency and truth. He is deeply convinced that everything has to be examined carefully and not everything can be believed, so he always strives to form his own opinion. Point 2. The strengths of the Judge archetype. The main quality of the Judge archetype is his sense of justice and pursuit of truth. He is able to question information critically. He has the ability to separate the essential from the unessential. That is why he is in his element when it comes to critical and scientific analysis, reports and audits. He is particularly suitable for controlling tasks. As his denotation and his need for fairness and congruency already indicate, he is able to investigate complex issues and make critical judgments in the process. Therefore, he is also particularly competent to apply this strength to legal matters. This is not to say that everyone who practices a legal profession or holds the position of a judge also has this personality archetype as his or her main type. Nor does it mean that every scientist would embody the described competence. Point 3. The Judge's weaknesses. The Judge archetype might have a tendency to cynicism, negativism, or even bitterness. His ability to perceive and seize opportunities and chances is often limited due to his critical and filtering approach. As a result, he may find it difficult to get enthusiastic about something or to look at things optimistically, and he would certainly not do so before he has checked that it is both true and just. The fact that he is also very self-critical can lead to a negative self-image and intense feelings of oppression or to a deep feeling of grief. Point 4. How to recognize the Judge archetype. There are some characteristics that allow us to recognize the Judge archetype as a personality trait. He is an introverted person. As described before, above all, he is characterized by a critical attitude. He wonders whether something he experiences or investigates is actually true, if an issue is correct or whether an argument is valid. In discussions, he will therefore consider the subject in a very differentiated way, doubt the arguments of his counterpart, and will decisively defend his own opinion. In team meetings or joint reflections, he will be rather hostile and doubting towards new ideas. Since he is also especially self-critical, a noticeably gloom mood can arise. A positive relationship with his fellow man can be hampered by his cynicism or sarcastic remarks, or he might jeer at someone if he considers something insufficiently sustained or incongruent. He may also be recognized by his pessimistic attitude towards things and life. A clear example of the Judge archetype is the German philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer, who believed that our world is the worst of all possible worlds. The Judge archetype can be confused with the archetype of the hermit, whereby the latter thinks more inductively. Generally, the hermit seems more sympathetic or emotionally distanced in his view of things, as his basic attitude is more neutral and therefore less pessimistic. In contrast to the Judge, whose pathological manifestation is described by the depressive disorder, the pathological manifestation of the hermit is the schizoid personality disorder. There is also a risk of confusion with the archetype of the master craftsman. The master craftsman is, however, more of a practitioner than a theoretician and focuses primarily on order and control. Therefore, the anancastic personality disorder is an essential characteristic of his pathological manifestation. In addition, there is a danger of confusion with the warrior archetype, who, due to his personality structure, would also be more likely to take an opposite position in discussions. But the warrior is not self-critical, and his pathological manifestation is the dissocial personality disorder. Point 5. What are a judge's reactions in conflict situations? The judge has 3 defense mechanisms or 3 typical behaviors in dealing with conflicts. First defense mechanism is denial. In this case, a part of reality is doubted, or the person refuses to accept it, because it does not fit their own worldview or beliefs. Another defense mechanism is negation. A fact is simply negated, even though it has already become partly conscious. For example, a judge archetype may find that they have no feelings for their counterpart, although the opposite is true. Finally, the first defense mechanism is rationalization. In doing so, the judge archetype refers to seemingly rational and logical motives, because they fit better to his view of the world or his self-image, or because they are more acceptable than his actual motivations for action. Point 6. The judge in mythology. The archetype of the judge is, like all personality archetypes, a basic pattern of human experience. We find this archetype in many myths and fairy tales, where he is often to be found as a judge figure, as his name suggests. Shamash, the sun god, corresponds to the judge archetype in Mesopotamian or Babylonian mythology. The sunlight brings light into the darkness and therefore has the potential to bring truth and injustice to light. Examples from Greco-Roman mythology can be found in Apollo and Justitia. Apollo, who, among other things, was the god of the sun, healing and truth, but he also executed people. Justitia is the goddess and allegorical personification of justice. She is depicted blindfolded as she is primarily devoted to analysis, evaluation, and collection of information. In the quest for the Holy Grail and Arthurian mythology, we find Kundry, the sorceress or witch, in the tales of Chrétien de Troyes. Kundry comes to Percival and condemns him after he failed in his first encounter with the Grail and the Grail King. In Nordic Germanic mythology, we find Tyr, the god of justice and just war, of judiciary and heaven. And finally, we find Daniel in the Bible, who becomes the king's critical advisor and acts as a judge in trials. Then there is Jeremiah, the weeping prophet, who deals with the destruction of Israel in a depressive way, and the Queen of Sheba, who, in order to test Solomon's wisdom, asks him critical questions. In modern myth, we also find the judge archetype. For example, in Game of Thrones, Ser Davos represents a balanced type of judge. while Stannis Baratheon represents the unbalanced type.
Stannis does not need to beg this lord or that lord for support. The Lord of Light stands behind him.
And how many ships has the Lord of Light got in his fleet?
He has no need for ships.
I'm sure he doesn't. But we do if we're going to war.
What is the life of one bastard boy against a kingdom?
Everything.
The boy must die.
Your Grace, the world has got so far bent. I've seen things crawl out of nightmares, but my eyes were open. I don't know if Robb Stark died because of the Red Woman's sorcery or because at war men die all the time, but I do know that uniting the 7 kingdoms with blood and magic is wrong. It is evil, and you are not an evil man.
Your mercy saved the boy's life. You feel good about that?
Aye, I do.
You saved one innocent. How many tens of thousands have you doomed?
There has got to be another way.
What is that?
Tell him. Tell him who it belonged to.
The Princess Shireen.
Tell him what you did to her. Tell him!
We burned her at the stake.
Why?
The army was strapped, the horses were dying. It was the only way.
You burned a little girl alive!
I only do what my lord commands.
If he commands you to burn children, your lord is evil.
And I declare upon the honor of my house that my beloved brother Robert left...
Wasn't my beloved brother? I didn't love him. He didn't love me.
A harmless courtesy, Your Grace.
A lie. Take it out.
That my brother Robert left no true-born heirs. The boy Joffrey, the boy Tommen, and the girl Marcella being born of incest between Cersei Lannister and her brother Jaime Lannister. By right of birth...
Jaime Lannister, the Kingslayer. Call him what he is.
And her brother Jaime Lannister, the Kingslayer. By right of birth and blood. I do this day lay claim...
Make it Sir Jaime Lannister, the Kingslayer. Whatever else he is, the man's still a knight.
Sir Jaime Lannister, the Kingslayer. By right of birth and blood. I do this day lay claim to the Iron Throne of Westeros.
In the Star Wars universe, the whining and pessimistic protocol droid C-3PO is a candidate for the rather unbalanced archetype of the Judge.
How did we get into this mess? I really don't know how. We seem to be made to suffer. It's our lot in life. What a desolate place this is. What are we going to do? We'll be sent to the spice mines of Kessel or smashed into who knows what.
I could be mistaken. They're using a very primitive dialect, but I do believe they think I am some sort of god.
Well, why don't you use your divine influence and get us out of this?
I beg your pardon, General Solo, but that just wouldn't be proper.
Proper?
It's against my programming to impersonate a deity.
We're doomed. We're doomed. We're doomed!
In The Lord of the Rings, we meet the elven Queen Galadriel, who looks critically into the hearts of each of the companions. In Harry Potter, we find the Judge-Archetype in Minerva McGonagall, who teaches at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry and is head of Gryffindor House, which includes Harry, Ron and Hermione. An example of a cynical and negative Judge-Archetype is the Black family's house elf Creature, who despisingly call all magicians of Muggle origin mudbloods. Lisa Simpson is also a good example of the Judge-Archetype.
Lisa Simpson! Lisa, there's no room for crazy bebop in my country, 'tis of thee.
But Mr. Largo, that's what my country's all about.
What?
I'm wailing out for the homeless family living out of its car. The Iowa farmer whose land has been taken away by unfeeling bureaucrats. The West Virginia coal miner coughing
Well, that's all fine and good.
Lisa refuses to play dodgeball because she is sad. Well, she doesn't look sad. I don't see any tears in her eyes.
It's not that kind of sad. I'm sorry, Dad, but you wouldn't understand.
Oh, sure I would, Princess. I have feelings too. You know, like my stomach hurts or I'm going crazy. Why don't you climb up on Daddy's knee and tell him all about it?
I'm just wondering, what's the point? Would it make any difference at all if I never existed? How can we sleep at night when there's so much suffering in the world?
Well,
Point 7. The Judge and the Hero's Journey. The Judge archetype provides the necessary skills to successfully complete the second stage of the hero's journey. This stage is about overcoming the inner and/or outer refusal and to follow the call to adventure from the first stage. By doing so, the hero finally dares to take the step into adventure and enters the following third stage. In the second stage, there is either someone who tries to stop him from the adventure, or the hero himself doubts that he is the right one to accept the call to adventure. In the refusal, we recognize the function of a critical state of mind, but also the potential to reach a conclusion through a determined analysis and thus overcome a refusal. In any project or venture we undertake, we must also evaluate the information we have about our goal and the possible strategies to achieve it. In order to be successful, we need the skills of the judge. By the way, you can find out more about this stage of the hero's journey in our video series about the hero's journey, link in the description. Point 8. How can you recognize a depressed person? If you can recognize the personality archetype of the judge in a person, it will certainly be easy for you to recognize his pathological manifestation, namely the depressive disorder or dysthymia, for this personality traits are often even more pronounced and stand out accordingly negative. The ICD-10 describes in its classification F31 to 33 various mild, moderate and severe forms of depression, depressive episodes and depressive disorders, and in F34.1 it describes dysthymia, a milder chronic form of depressive disorder. In the typical mild to severe depressive episodes or chronic conditions, the affected person suffers from a depressed mood and a reduction in drive and activity. The ability to enjoy, concentrate and take an interest in something is also reduced. Pronounced fatigue can occur after the slightest effort. There are sleeping and eating disorders. Self-esteem and self-confidence are almost always affected. Feelings of guilt or thoughts of worthlessness occur even in a mild form. The depressed mood remains unchanged from day to day without any influence from life circumstances. So-called somatic symptoms, such as nausea, stomach aches and headaches, can also occur. Early morning waking, morning depression, marked psychomotor retardation, agitation, loss of appetite, weight loss and loss of libido can be further signs of depression. Maybe we'll make a video about personality disorders later, perhaps in an extra channel. Simply subscribe to our channel, and when the time comes we will let you know, or subscribe to our newsletter. Please find the link in the description. Someone who suffers from a depressive disorder is one of the typically difficult personalities. If the boss, spouse or life partner, a parent or child suffers from depression, it is usually quite challenging for the environment. So the question arises, how to deal with a judge, a negative or depressed person? Point 9. Here are a few initial tips. In order to deal well with a judge or a depressed person, it is important to understand what their thinking or knowledge is based on, and what their fundamental and solid cognitions are in their own opinion. It is therefore useful to ask them questions about this and to remember the answer well. Furthermore, it is useful to encourage the judge to draw their own conclusions on a matter. This can also be done by asking them appropriate, meaningful questions about how they assess, judge and see things. They will most likely appreciate this approach, as their basic needs for congruence, justice and truth are addressed. For this motivates them to find out the truth for themselves and to form their own logical and congruent picture. Here it is important to note that a person with the personality archetype of the judge will only accept a minimum of arguments. Only those he cannot refute or those that do not contradict his more important values. Therefore, he needs such facts and proofs for every step that have a strong validity according to his values and worldview. At each step, his confirmation should be sought, so that he stays involved. As already mentioned, it works best if he formulates the most important conclusions himself. Since the Judge archetype would never get involved in anything that might turn out to be wrong or erroneous, he will be able to get involved only in a way he considers to be reliable. In case of doubt, he would also go for the lesser of two evils, if there were choices. Since he is also self-critical, he can use critical questions or discussions to find out where he has some catching up to do or where further analysis is needed to achieve a congruent assessment. It is important to note here his defense mechanisms, which could prevent him from making a truthful analysis. These mechanisms should be uncovered and included for the sake of close examination. Along the lines of, be critical with yourself now, so that he can draw the appropriate conclusion and realize any errors he might have made. It is important for a person with a depressive disorder or a depressive mood to be able to change their focus from a critical, analytical attitude in which no changes in their condition are possible to an open and perceptive attitude. The most important thing is to enable them to consider all the possibilities at first and not to devalue and exclude any of them too early. The more options and potentials can be offered and perceived, the more possibilities there are for a new attitude and approach. If you want to learn more about how you can better recognize and understand this archetype in yourself and in others, and how you can develop the positive aspects of this personality archetype in you, and how to overcome the negative aspects, and how you can deal optimally with people in whom this archetype is strong and perhaps unbalanced or pathologically developed, whether in therapy, business, relationship, or in private life, then we look forward to meeting you personally at our seminars on the personality archetype. To be always up to date, please subscribe to our newsletter. You will find the link in the video description. Point 10. How can a judge or depressed person bring the personality in balance? It is in the nature of things that a depressive person, the pathological manifestation of the Judge archetype, takes a particularly critical view of themselves and their life. This can lead to varyingly strong degrees of pessimistic attitudes and even to depressive disorders. If someone wants to get a grip on their depression, or if a well-developed judge wants to expand his competencies, or if you want to balance your inner personality archetype of the judge, it is a good idea to develop the complementary archetype, namely the archetype of the explorer within yourself. The explorer has in common with the judge that both are primarily concerned with information. Where the judge analyzes and critically evaluates information, the explorer is very curious and collects a lot of information. In doing so, the explorer sees many possibilities and chances. To learn more about the archetype of the explorer, watch the video in our channel. Do you see yourself as a judge? Do you know people in your environment to whom these personality traits correspond? What do you find particularly difficult in dealing with these people? Which well-known people, real or fictitious ones, with the characteristics of the judge or those corresponding to a depressive disorder do you know? Tell us your answer and ask all your questions in the comments. We will make a video at the end of the series in which we answer your questions. We are looking forward to your comments. If not done already, like and share the video, subscribe to our channel and activate the bell to be always up to date. Thanks a lot, and see you soon!